Hello everybody, this is Andy from the SDRplay development team, and in today's video we're going to take a look at a great little application that we've just been made aware of. A customer came through on our support ticket system and told us about this application, asked if it would work with an RSP and SDRuno because he'd been having some problems. So we took a look at it, we really liked the application, and so we've made some changes to SDRuno to make this work, and in our testing it's been working absolutely great. So what is it? It's an application called VirtualHere. It's a very simple downloaded software solution on the server client, and it allows USB data from the server to be transferred to the client over a network and then appear back as USB data again on the client. And so really it appears on the, like if you've got a Windows system and in the device manager you see the device appearing in there just as if the RSP was plugged in locally. We think it's a great little application and we've been testing it over the last week or so, so we thought we'd do a video and show you guys what it's all about. And for LAN users this is a much better solution than the RSP TCP server. And we'll go through some slides, we'll show you why that is the case, give you a bit of an overview of the system, and then after the slides we'll go over and have a look at the system running live in a demonstration. Okay, so the current approach is for the RSP TCP server to be used on a server in conjunction with the EXTIO version of SDRuno on a Windows client. So this has a number of benefits. Obviously you can use it across a wide area network because in the because you have the API and the hardware driver installed on the server, so you can apply decimation to the sample rate, so there is that benefit to it. But in other regards you're limited to the EXTIO version of SDRuno, and we know that that hasn't had the same level of development as the RSP version of SDRuno over the last couple of years. So that's really how the current system works for a remote RSP access. Now with this new system, this is changed things dramatically. So again, on the server side can be it's a Raspberry Pi in this instance because that's what we're demonstrating, but it can be any server. It can be Linux or Mac or even a Windows server. You have just the VirtualHere server software installed with the RSP connected, and then on the client side you have the VirtualHere client installed as well as the full install version of SDRuno. And instantly you can see that the great benefit here is that you can use the full version of SDRuno. You can do scanning, you can look at HDR mode for an RSP DX, you can use master slave mode for the RSP Duo, you can run of course SDRuno, and then you can do ADSB. So you can do everything that you'd wanted to do with an RSP locally but remotely. So let's just take a step back and actually talk about what VirtualHere is. So it's a server client piece of software that enables the transfer of USB data from one system to another over a network. It will work across a wide area network, but for the sort of data rates that we're talking about with IQ streams, we're just going to be purely focusing on a LAN aspect of it for now. The server can be any platform, Linux, Mac, Windows for x86 hardware, and then for ARM processors you've got things like the Raspberry Pi and Odroid. We're looking at the Raspberry Pi 4 specifically. Those of you that have watched previous videos and webinars that we've done where we've talked about small board computers before, remember that the previous generation of the Raspberry Pis, the 2 and 3, their bandwidth is shared between the USB system and the Ethernet system. So the sort of data rates that we're talking about here would probably not be suitable for a Raspberry Pi 2 or 3. In fact, when we looked at a Raspberry Pi 3, it worked with some sample rates, but with some of the higher sample rates it was giving some really poor performance. But we've been testing with a Raspberry Pi 4 and have seen absolutely no issues whatsoever any modes of the RSP, any sample rates. It just works, and it's such a great system. But because of the data rates involved, we're talking about up to 200 megabits per second for some of the higher data rates. It is really a LAN solution. It's not a wide area network solution. The client software is free, and the server software, there is a free version and a paid for version. So the great thing about this is that you can try it for free. If you only ever want to just distribute one RSP from the server, you can use the free version. If you want to maybe have a look at exporting 2 RSPs or an RSP and some other device, there are optimized paid for versions of the server software. Here we've got a snapshot of a Windows client, and you can see the VirtualHere software running on the right hand side. It says the 3020 is in use, and 3020 is the product ID for an RSP Duo. I'll come back to product IDs in just a minute. But once you've selected on that device and made it in use by us, then over on the left hand side you can see on the device manager that the RSP Duo, the remote RSP Duo, is actually appearing as if it was a local device to the Windows system. And then so from that point on, you just use that device as if it was attached locally to this machine. And this is just a screenshot to show the RSP Duo in single tuner mode. We had that working. In fact, we've had all the RSPs working in all modes, and it's all been working very, very, very well. So pros and cons of the system. The pros are, there are a heck of a lot of pros. You can use the full version of SDRuno, which means, as I said, you can do scanning and look at HDR mode and every aspect of the RSP, but you don't need the RSP physically attached to the local machine, which is great. The load is very light on the server side, which surprised us, but it's a very neat, efficient system. It works for lots of different server applications, so Mac, Linux, Windows, ARM-based processors, and for a single device the system is free, and there is no RSP specific server software required. So literally bare bones server, just get the VirtualHere server software installed, that's it. Everything else is done on the client. Now here's the big, I should have like a red light warning here. There's a big sirens going off. Please, please, please listen to what I'm about to say. So on the example that we're giving here is with a Raspberry Pi, now, which is an ARM-based processor. Now with USB there are 2 different transfer modes that you can use. One is called isochronous transfer mode, and one is called bulk transfer mode. Isochronous mode is typically used for high-end devices that transmit a lot of data and have a low latency requirement. By default, the RSP and SDRuno together use isochronous mode. Now we've had problems in the past with ARM-based devices and their isochronous support. So we also added in, some time ago, we added in the bulk transfer mode support for an RSP. So SDRuno now, in version 1.40.1 onwards, SDRuno can now selectively, in the main panel settings, there is an option to change the USB transfer mode from isochronous, which is the default and will remain the default, to bulk mode. And that bulk mode is purely to support access to VirtualHere running on an ARM-based server, which is what we're going to be demonstrating in this video. Now, if you do not do that, if you try to access VirtualHere that's running on an ARM-based server, if you try to access that device and you're still in isochronous mode in SDRuno, SDRuno will crash, your PC will probably crash, and it will probably blue screen. And there's nothing we can do about that. So I'm just telling you now, for those who want to use that combination of server and client, you have been warned. I've also used this VirtualHere server software on a Linux x86 machine, and that runs for me in isochronous mode just fine. So this is purely where you've got an ARM server running VirtualHere. Please, please, please make sure that SDRuno is set to bulk mode before you press play. Also, just to give you an idea of some of the data rates involved, we did do some measurements, and for the, I think for the lowest data rate was about 56 megabits per second, and with some of the higher data rates we're talking about 200 megabits per second. So unless you've got in excess of 200 megabits per second upload speed, this is not a system that you would look to use for a wide area network. But for local area networks where you've got gigabit cards, gigabit switches, this system is just great. It's fabulous. I mentioned before about the product code, so this slide just tells you what the product codes are for each of the RSPs. You can, in the VirtualHere software, you can right click and rename the product ID codes. So the first time round where you see it says 3020 or 3030, you can actually rename that as RSP Duo, RSP DX. So for future use, you'll just see the RSP name, and again I'll show you that in the demonstration. But this slide is for your reference, really. And then lastly, for those of you that want to set up just a headless server, a bit like what we did for the TCP server, we set up a headless server. You can do that for this software, and this has come from their FAQ page. I'll show you this in the demonstration where to get this information. But again, we've just very quickly tested this, and it all just works. So you literally just can apply power to your server, and instantly you're up and running with VirtualHere. So that covers the slides and the overview of VirtualHere. Hopefully you've got a good feel for what the system does. So now we're going to go over to my other screen, and we're going to show you the installation on the server side, what you need to do there. Then we'll show SDRuno and what you can do with SDRuno. And so let's get across to the demonstration. Okay, so here we are on our Raspberry Pi. This is a Raspberry Pi 4. I've literally just downloaded the latest version of Raspbian OS from the Raspberry Pi website. In fact, I have put VirtualHere on a Linux x86 machine that I have on my network that has a card reader on it, and I used it to share that to my Windows machine so that I could actually burn the SD card. So VirtualHere has quite a number of uses. Anyway, I have a brand new SD card burned onto with Raspbian burned on here, and I don't have anything other than what was provided by the Raspberry Pi operating system by default, and I don't have anything in the downloads section. I haven't done anything. I've literally just opened up the virtualhere.com website, and we're now going to look at the server software. So I'm going to click on Linux USB server, and we're going to go down. There's lots of useful information here for you to have a read through, so I would encourage you to do that. And we're going to find the generic VirtualHere USB server builds. If you pay the money for the license version and you want to share more than one RSP, then you can look at there's some optimized builds further down for ARM and for x86 and so on. But we're going to focus on the Raspberry Pi build that we need. So we have a Raspberry Pi 4, which means we need this ARM version of the server here. So I'm just going to click on that, and it's going to download, and it will take just a few seconds because it's only less than 400 kilobytes. So I think that's done. We'll now go into our downloads folder and see if we can find it, and here it is. So this is our VirtualHere server software. You can see that it is just a regular file at the moment, so we need to make that executable. So we'll do that by doing chmod 755 and then the file name, and now we look at the file again in ls, and you'll see that it's turned green and it now has X over here, which means that it's now an executable. So then we're going to run this as root to give it system-wide permissions, and that's it. The server is now running, and that's all we have to do on the Raspberry Pi. That's everything. So we're now going to go over to our Windows desktop, which is over here. Again, I'm on the virtualhere.com website. I just want to show you in the device manager, in the sound, video and game controllers section, you can see in here I don't have any RSPs connected at all, just some microphones and bits and pieces, but there's no RSPs in this list anywhere. So we're back onto the virtualhere.com website. Let's click on the client section this time, and you'll see that there are clients for different versions of the of your operating systems. There's Windows, OS X and Linux. The one we're interested in at the moment is Windows 64-bit, so I'm just going to click on that, wait for that to download. It's 5 megabytes, so that's already done, and I'll go to our downloads page, and you'll see here there's an executable which we shall start. Now that starts up and you get this little window here, so I'm going to just remove some of these other, we don't need these other windows now, so we'll get these out of the way. And you can see it says USB hubs. Now sometimes it will search for the hubs on the network, and so sometimes it will actually come up and say Raspberry Pi hub. In this instance it hasn't, so I'm going to right click on here. You see the auto find is ticked, and sometimes it will find those, sometimes I haven't had it find them, but you can specify a hub. So in this window here we're going to add a server, and I know the IP address of the Raspberry Pi. For mine it's 192.168.1.160. I don't need to provide the port, it will automatically find it, so I hit OK, and you can see that it says USB Server Trial Edition, because that's what it is. I hit OK, and I'm going to close this Specify Hubs panel, and you can see that it now says Raspberry Hub, and I have two devices. I have a keyboard plugged in, which is correct, and which says USB receiver, and it also says I have an a 0x3030 device, and as we talked about this in the slides, 3030 is an RSP DX. So I'm actually going to select this device. Now before I try to use it, I'm going to right click on it, and I have a number of options, but I'm actually going to click on rename, and I'm going to call this an RSP DX. And what that does is it tells the Raspberry Pi server that whenever it shares that device, it will remember that it is an RSP DX, so you won't get the 3030 anymore, and then you can obviously do that with each RSP, and it will remember what they are. So now we've got that. Now we're going to right click on it and say use this device, and what you'll notice is that it says in use by you. We have we had some activity in the device manager. Now sometimes you have to right click this and select in use twice. Sometimes I've had to have it do it, sometimes it does it once, but the important thing is to make sure that it stays bold and says in use by you. If after a few seconds it just says it's available, then just right click and select use again, and you won't have to do it more than twice, but sometimes I have had it, you've had to do it twice. Now you can see in our device manager we have an RSP DX, and that is coming from VirtualHere from the Raspberry Pi. So I can close the device manager. I don't particularly need the virtual client window anymore, so I can close that. It will just reduce down to an icon in the system tray, so it always is running. And now we'll start SDRuno. And we'll start SDRuno up. And what you'll see here is that it has configured itself as an RSP DX. I can have a look at the About window, and it's so we're on version 1.40.1, which is the first version of SDRuno to support this VirtualHere feature. And you'll see that it says my device serial number. All of this information is coming across from the Raspberry Pi. So before I do anything in SDRuno, remember the very important step, which is to go into the settings panel of the main panel. I'll bring it into the middle here, and this USB transfer mode, because our server is an ARM based server, we have to change the isochronous transfer mode to bulk. And remember, if we don't do that, then SDRuno will crash, so will your PC, and most likely you'll get a blue screen as well. So very important, make sure that says bulk. And when we change that and we close the settings, you'll also notice that up in the main panel, when the bulk mode is in use, it will actually say on the main panel USB bulk. It'll say it right there, so you'll always know whether you're in bulk mode or isochronous mode. If you're in isochronous mode, there is no text, and if you've got text here that says USB bulk, you're in bulk mode. So now we have all that set up and we're talking to our RSP DX. We can just, I'm going to mute this because we'll get noise to start with, and we'll just press play. And now this data stream is coming from the Raspberry Pi 4 across the network, and I can use this now just as any RSP that was local. Now my antenna is connected to antenna port C, so I'm going to click on antenna C. It's not a particularly good antenna. Let's have a look at HDR mode. So we've got the full range of all the SDRuno features. We can look at medium wave, and there's my medium wave band, so I can tune around. I'm going to keep this muted because I don't want the video to get a copyright strike, but this audio is all going to be good. And I can go to long wave, and there's radio 4, and I can then go to other bands. There's the 40 meter band, there's the 20 meter band. I can also use plugins, so I can do audio recording of any particular VFO that I want to choose to tune to. I can use the DAB plugin, I can use the cluster plugin, I can do scanning. So anything that I could do with an RSP local, I can actually do with this running. And don't forget, the data is coming across the network via the Raspberry Pi 4 in this case, but you can obviously choose which server you put this software on. It's very simple to start, very simple to get running, and yeah, so we recommend that for so that was a quick demonstration of VirtualHere, and we recommend that for LAN users that you use this system over the RSP TCP server. Very important point is that this is not a replacement for the server client software that we are developing for SDRuno. That work is still ongoing and still underway, and we will still have the server client version of SDRuno. So don't worry, that is still coming. So that will be this is a great tool for people to use before that arrives, if you're on a LAN. Of course, if you're on a WAN, the data rates won't sort of allow you to use this across wide area network, whereas the server client software that we're developing for SDRuno, that will have a mode where it will work wide area network as well. But we just wanted to show you this little application. We're very glad that we was put onto it by a customer in the support system, and we hope you get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and let us know how you get on and how you find it. So that was it, VirtualHere. Thanks for watching, everybody, and see you in the next video.